When people need help getting through a difficult situation, the Pocket Prayer Quilt is intended to provide guidance and comfort. The recipient will carry one to remind them of the power of prayer or just when they need a hug. There are many ways to make a pocket prayer quilt, but in this video I will show you two different designs, the 4-patch and the windmill, which can be made in two different sizes. Refer to the following slides for the materials you will need for this project. The construction is the same for either size. This is what you'll need for the 4-patch. And this is what you'll need for the windmill. The first thing is to gather your quilting cotton scraps and press your fabrics. This is a great scrap busting project. Next, get your batting ready. You can use needle punch fleece, cotton batting, solid color polar fleece, and if these are too thick for you, try using several layers of muslin. You will also need a sew-on charm or button in the shape of a cross, heart, or Star of David. Look in the jewelry making department or button section of your craft store. It should measure approximately 1/2 inch to 7/8 of an inch, and make sure it fits on top of your pocket quilt and not hang off the edge. And please, nothing gaudy or too heavy. Before you begin, check your presser foot with a ruler so you know where your 1/4 inch seam allowance should be. That's my general purpose foot on the left and a quilting foot on the right. Notice they both have red markings to help line up the seam allowance. In this example, I will be making the smaller square, so adjust the measurements accordingly if you're making the larger one. Using a rotary cutter and guide, straighten one edge of your fabric. Then cut strips 1.5 inches wide from both of your coordinating fabrics. Accuracy is very important for this project, so slow down and take your time. Don't forget to straighten the ends up too. Then with the right sides of your coordinating strips together, match them up and pin or clip them in place. Sew these two strips together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Back tack at the beginning to secure the threads. And remember, follow the right markings on your presser foot to achieve a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You could also place a piece of painter's tape on your machine to mark the 1/4 inch seam allowance and use that as a guide. Press the seam allowance towards the darker color. Now straighten the edge and cut two pieces 1 1/2 inches wide. Match up these two units with the right sides together, lining up the seams so you have the seam allowances going in opposite directions. And sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam, back tacking at the beginning and end of the seam. Note that there are two quilt tops shown in this picture. Press the seam open and you should now have a 2.5 inch square. Make a 3-layer stack with the top placed right side up, the backing placed right side down, and finish with the batting. Here's a tip. Trim away the 1/4 inch seam allowance of the batting on one of the sides. Then sew the 3 sides together, leaving the trimmed edge open. Make sure to back tack at the beginning and end of the seam. We're on the home stretch now. Now clip the corners and grade the batting close to the seam. Now turn your pocket right side out so the batting's on the inside, and using a turning tool, coax those corners out, being careful not to punch a hole through the fabric. And finger press when you're done. Here's my method to finish the open edge. Take your fingers and turn under the open edge 1/4 of an inch and pin it all the way around the top. I would iron it, but it's hard to get an iron in here, so I found that it's easier just to use my fingers and finger press it and then pin it. This is the best method that I've found to produce a nice sharp line and good corners when you're stitching it closed. Now bring the folded edges of the seam together and finger press it, bringing the front and the back together. Once you're satisfied, reposition the pins to catch both the front and the back. You are ready to top stitch around the outside of the square, making sure to catch the turned under edge. You should have a finished square. Now it's time to play. Place the charm or button on top in the position that you want it and securely stitch it to the quilt square, stitching it either by hand or carefully by machine as you would a button. And to finish, use a length of embroidery floss and tack it through the center and tie it securely with several overhand knots. Trim the ends of the embroidery floss prayer knot to about 3/4 inch in length. The second design is the Hourglass Patch. This method will produce 4 pocket quilt tops. If you start with a 5-inch square, you'll have a finished size of 2.5 inch, and if you start with 5.5-inch square, your finished size will be 2 3/4 inches. The method of construction is the same for either size. In this example, I'm using 5-inch fabric squares. First, with right sides together, stitch the 2 coordinating squares to each other, sewing all around the outside edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then, from this big square, you're going to make 4 smaller triangles by cutting it from corner to corner. Each of these smaller triangles will already be sewn together along one edge. After they are cut apart, press these 4 pieces open, pressing the seam allowance towards the darker fabric. Take 2 units and put them right sides together with the opposite fabrics together and match the seams. Now draw a line from corner to corner perpendicular to the seam line. This will be your cutting line. Then draw a line 1/4 inch away on either side of this middle line, and these 2 lines are your sewing lines. Sew this block together on the sewing lines Then cut the block apart along the middle line, being careful not to cut through the stitches that you've just made. When you're done, take it to the ironing board and press those seams open, and you will have 4 hourglass patch tops. Now go ahead and finish these quilt tops the same way that you did the 4 patch. And there you have it, pocket prayer quilts and heart hugs. Our charity will add their own prayer card, but if you are making these for yourself, just attach one with a small safety pin. And if you are so inclined, you may say a prayer or positive thoughts over your quilt for the recipient. Thank you so much for crafting with us. We truly, really appreciate you and your support that you give to all of our partner charities.